you wait for the time when you're really having a discussion about this issue to tell your friend what you think about drinking alcohol. You don't tell them right before they're going to go out and have a good time. They think a good time with their friends. So I think here it's not a question of principle. The principle is clear. It's about choice of when and how and means and method. Is that clear? The issue you ask about how Muslims' ability to put up with things, I actually wrote this, I want to say article. I think it's an article, but it's pretty well researched. I spent a lot of time researching it. Called, what is it called? Like, How Much Can Muslims Stomach? I like the title. So it's about, but I talk about immediate family incest and Hindu widow immolation. So Muslim scholars, it seems to be Muslim scholars and Muslim rulers in South Asia allowed Hindu widows to throw themselves on the pyre of their dead husbands, sati, provided that they got permission from the governor, the Muslim governor, and that they were not forced to do it. So if they wanted to do this, Muslim rulers were like, okay. Oh, and Muslim rulers also and governors also tried to convince them not to. They'd say, well, we'll give you a stipend even though you're a widow. We'll give your children stipends. But if the person really wanted to do it, they were, okay, go ahead. The British banned sati in 1829. And the American, I think it's the Reynolds or Davis decision in 1879 or 1890, I can't remember which Supreme Court decision, but the judge writing the decision actually uses Hindu wife immolation, widow immolation, as an example of why governments have to interfere in religious beliefs. Like, this was so unacceptable to Americans, to American law, that this was an instance, the textbook example of when a government has to say you can't allow people to follow their religion. So the Muslim Islamic law is more tolerant than both British and American law. That's what I think is this big irony. Muslims are always shown to be intolerant. In fact, Islamic law is supremely tolerant. Immediate family incest. In Zoroastrian law, until the 14th century, it was permitted to have immediate family incest marriages between father, daughter, mother, son, and brother, sister. It was extremely rare. Extremely rare. Which is very interesting. The majority position of Muslim scholars was that Muslims would permit Zoroastrians living under Muslim rule to engage in immediate family incest. That was the majority position. Why? Because this was part of their religion. That's part of their religion.
So we can't impose our...
This was the ultimate argument. The ultimate argument is the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet have shown, without a doubt, that Muslims are commanded to allow non-Muslims to continue practicing their religion under Muslim protection. We are commanded to indulge their practice of their religion, even though they believe things that are completely unacceptable, even though they deny our belief in our religion, they deny the prophecy of Muhammad, they deny all sorts of things that are absolutely fundamental to Islam. Actually, the argument of Muslim scholars was, there's nothing worse than kufr. There's nothing worse than unbelief. And if you're going to allow unbelief, and it's the worst thing, then what justification do you have for banning? Immediate family incest is disgusting. In fact, it's one of the few almost universal human taboos that basically every society agrees on. But they said this is not as bad as kufr. Now, and someone would say, okay, well then do you allow people to commit murder or do human sacrifice? No, because of hukuk al-ibad. People have every human being has certain rights. And just so you think I'm not trying to shoehorn human rights into Islam here, haq means right. Hukuk means rights. Ibad means slaves of God, like people. So it means literally the rights of the slaves of God, i.e. human beings. A human being does not have a right to kill another human being without reason. So that's why with sati, with Hindu widow immolation, Muslims only allowed it if the woman demonstrated she wanted to do it. And they prohibited forced immolation. So that's why Muslims can allow immediate family incest marriage, but they wouldn't allow, let's say, human sacrifice in our religion. even if it's part of someone's religion. That's why, for example, although later in Islamic civilization Muslims allowed riba, the Prophet, in one of the treaties we have, which is actually, even non-Muslim scholars think it's probably authentic, very early treaty, the treaty that the Prophet had with the Christians of Najran. Najran is right now on the Saudi-Yemeni border, southern Arabia. He allowed them to continue practicing Christianity. He said, we won't mess with you at all. You pay a certain tax to us, and you also cannot have riba. You can't do interest. Because that was seen as violating the rights of others to not be exploited.
We'll take 2 more questions. Amir?
I'm fine, you just.
That guy had a
Okay.
question.
Go first? Okay, so a common scenario that Muslims will face in the West is you want to build a mosque and face opposition, and maybe a Christian or Jew asks us, would I be allowed to build a church or synagogue in Muslim countries? How would you respond to that?
Other questions?
My question was sort of going back to your last point before you ended with Zina, in terms of coalition building, and my question is on complete reciprocity of what they will give you, and whether you should be, or whether we should hold ourselves to being entirely reciprocal. So for example, when it comes to LGBTQ people, right? We can coalition build on things that are common goals to all of us. For example, coalition build against Trump's rhetoric, because that affects both of us. But then, for example, when it comes to Islamophobia, a lot of times the LGBTQI community will come very directly to our support, and in our rallies and stuff. For example. Or we don't really have rallies, but anything really. But then, is it our obligation to also reciprocate in the same manner? For example, attend, and I'm sort of asking from classical Islamic framework. I know that there's different opinions, but is it our duty to reciprocate in the same way, and also, what do we have to support, and what don't we have to support?
Okay, so 2 very good questions. The answer to this is easy. So the fiqh in Islamic history on houses of worship of non-Muslims under Muslim rule is extremely broad. You find a lot of different opinions. So the kind of Shafi'i opinion is, let's just say churches and mosques, or churches and synagogues are places where kufr happens, the shirk happens. You can't encourage that. Whereas the Hanafi position is, no, the Quran says these are, bay'un wa sawami'u masajidu wa salatun yudhkaru fiha isma Allah, right? It's yudhkaru fiha isma Allah. I think that's I didn't give the verse exactly, but those are the places that are mentioned. Synagogues, churches, temples, and mosques. These are places where God's name is mentioned. In the Hanafi tradition, they say, look, these are, people might have disagreements about important details, but God's name is being honored in these places, so they have to protect it. So there's just, even at the basic interpretive level of the Quran, there's disagreement about which direction you go. And then if you look at even the companion opinions, successor opinions, the opinion of Ibn Abbas, which becomes the kind of, and Omar ibn Abdulaziz, which becomes the main opinion in Sunni Islam, is that churches and synagogues new ones cannot be built in Muslim cities, but existing ones are fine. And if you have non-Muslims living in their own area, they can build their own mosques and build their own churches and stuff like that. That's fine. And this, I think, this really became the practical opinion which was adopted, which was if Christians and Jews were living in an area which was inhabited by Muslims, they're all mixed up together, then Christians and Jews were generally not allowed to build new churches and synagogues. They were not allowed to have public processions with the crosses. They were not allowed to have, they didn't have church bells, but these wooden clackers they would use instead of church bells. But if they were in another area, they could have church bells, they could build new churches, they could build new synagogues, they could have pig markets, they could have booze markets, whatever, because this was in their own area. In fact, even the rule that in a Muslim city you couldn't have church and synagogue, that wasn't actually followed, because Baghdad was a city built by Muslims, it was a totally new city, and in it there were all these churches and synagogues. In fact, at one point, Muslims were squatting in this monastery, and the monks went to the caliph, I think it was al-Mansur at the time, and complained, and he kicked them out. He said, okay, you guys gotta get out, Muslims, you gotta get out, this is their monastery. So, and another important point is that it depends on the negotiations. How was an area conquered? So when Muslims moved into an area, if they signed a peace treaty or came to an agreement, which is the majority, in most cases, with the Jewish, Hindu, whatever local population, if they said, you guys can do this, the agreement, that was what carried the day, not some rule about no churches and mosques. That's why when Muslims went into India in 711, what's called the Brahmanabad Compact, they treated the Hindus like people of the book. In fact, even the upper class of the Hindus, the Brahmins, were exempt from jizya. That was part of the agreement. So when someone says that point to me, I say, yeah, sure, why not? I have no problem. If I could easily go back and give you all sorts of authoritative precedents from Islamic law and history that shows that Muslims allowed non-Muslims to build places of worship under Muslim rule. Now, if there's some country that has an extremely prohibitive ruling on that, that's not my problem. Go talk to the people from that country and debate with them. And if you want me to write a letter criticizing them, I'm happy to. But that's not my problem. I don't answer for the policies of specific Muslim countries. And then someone else, your question about, so I think, I'm not an activist. Well, I don't know what the hell I am. But I'm definitely not an effective activist. And I'm not a community organizer, because I barely leave my house. But what I would say is, I would ask myself this question: what am I supporting? So let's say there's, what might prompt a rally for LGBTQ issues? Something hateful has been written on the spray painted on the wall. Die, go home, or die, tranny or something like that. I don't know. Or there's an attack on somebody. What are these are examples. These are the type of things that happen, right? Or Donald Trump says something. President Trump says something. What are you supporting? Are you saying, I support these people's lifestyle and their values, that's why I'm upset? Or are you saying, I support the right of citizens in this country to go about their daily business without molestation, without egregious offense, without physical harm, without physical intimidation, not being threatened by their public officials? Yeah, I have no problem supporting that. Because guess what? That's exactly what I want as a Muslim. It's exactly what I want as a Muslim. And I know there's lots of people out there who don't approve of the way I dress, they don't approve of what I believe, they don't approve of things that I do in my daily life. But if they're willing to come out and protest for my protection and my right to live at peace, then I'm going to do it for them. Because I also agree with these things. So I think the question is, how do you phrase this in your own mind? I'm not trying to say how do you justify it. My question to you is, how do you understand it?
So we'll take one final question.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then we'll close. Yeah.
Okay. I thank you for this very wide-ranging discussion, and yes, I'm sure you're exhausted. I'm happy you pointed out the value of history, of knowing history, of all these times and limitations on how rules are interpreted at various times. I'd like to share just one interpretation that was very interesting. I found very interesting that the Khalifa Umar ibn Khattab, once displaced or fired a governor just because he was asking too much of the people. He was asking for more what the people can take. Mm-hmm. So, in a way, it's a study in itself of what limitations was he pushing? What was he, what did he see? And what if this becomes a general, that rulers cannot ask or push people around for more what they can handle, what they can take? So that would be a different right concept right there, political right concept. My question is, because in many ways one has to learn a lot of history in order to differentiate what is the ethical content and norms, or what is the religious versus what is in fact political and has been common under so many political, economical, cultural, that was common among many societies for that period of time. That wasn't, so one has to compare Islam to many other societies. But the question is basically, from your knowledge of the hadith, where are some of the injunctions or about self-criticism? For instance, in the Middle East, men can criticize women as much as they like, but they don't look at themselves and say, here, I should be critical of this. Are there some rules of being self-critical? Because slavery can be interpreted many ways and has been ideologically interpreted many ways for either to blame the Arabs, to blame the Jews, to blame somebody who was the slave owner versus, or merchant, or, so slavery was kind of used in such multiplicity of ways. And so how can we criticize that very real notion that yes, slavery was a certain period of history, and freedom is still a long way to go for all societies concerned in a way. But this kind of, I know, for instance, philosophy in Christianity, know thyself, to thine own self be true. In
Internal
Islam,
criticism.
what would be
You're asking about what's the point? Yeah, I mean, I think that in Surah Al-Qiyamah, I think there's this notion of a nafs al-lawama, the self-reproaching soul, I think is how. Where's the study come in? The self-reproaching soul.
Yeah, that would be
this is a core job of a Muslim, and of a thoughtful, conscientious person, is to constantly be interrogating themselves. What is it that I really want? What am I? I think it's funny when we talk about. Someone writes a book about, let's say some guy who lived in 1200, and they say, why did this guy do this and that? They base it on one snippet here and one snippet there. And for God's sake, we don't even know why we do stuff, let alone why some other person does stuff that when we can talk to them, let alone someone who's been dead at 800 years, we have very limited information about. So I think, the complexity of human motivation is really important to keep in mind. And so for us, the reason it's important is we have to constantly ask God to purify our intentions and ask yourself, what is my intention? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? But at the same time, you don't want this to become paralyzing. If you, earlier we were talking about anthropologists today, and the sort of reflexive positionality and stuff becomes incapacitating, and eventually you just sort of end up going and studying a bunch of ants or something because you feel so guilty about looking at any other human being. So it can't become paralyzing. So, you ask God to purify your intentions. You do your best to ask, why am I doing this? Could it be for this reason? Could it be for that reason? Don't be afraid to look and explore the dark corners of your soul. This is very important for me. I mean, I think for everyone, this is really important from my own views. And when I write books and stuff, or if I take positions on something, sometimes in my life, I had a position on something, and then I looked deep inside me, and I said, I think this is because you're greedy. You're afraid of losing something. You're afraid of losing power. You're afraid of losing privilege. And when you have those moments of realization, they're very liberating, because you become free of this manacle that was inside you on your heart. And so it's very important to do that. I agree. And then once you ask yourself as sincerely as you can, you go ahead. I think it was Davy Crockett who said, first make sure you're right, then go ahead.
I think that's a great place to end.
Davy Crockett quote.
I want to thank you, Dr. Jackson and Dr.
That's great. I elevated just elder statesman status.
Dr. Jonathan Brown. See, the conversation was so engaging.
Yeah,
We forgot
I'm
names.
not
And
gonna
we've all become one. But we really do want to thank you not only for coming, but for your patience in answering the questions. And you know, I think that a lot of what you had to offer was food for thought, and I can tell, like, just by everybody sticking around, wanting more, that we really appreciate your time here. I want to thank Zena for her great questions, her prodding questions, you know, and for really representing Princeton
Yeah,
well.
good job.
And Princeton Muslim Life well. We want to invite you to our next event. Unfortunately, if you have the list of events that we have, there's a conversation that was supposed to happen on Islam and atheism, and we were really looking forward to that. The scholar who is coming, actually all the way from the UK, something happened with his visa, he wasn't able to make it. So hopefully we'll reschedule that in the spring or some other time. But the next event that we do have is on December 1st, and it's actually a majlis that is going to be a majlis of the Shia community, and it's a majlis that everyone's invited to observe or participate in as you feel comfortable. And if you are a Sunni or you're not somebody who's Shia, and you have always wondered what do these Shia gatherings look like, where they come and they commemorate the life and the martyrdom of Hussein, may God be pleased with him, this is your opportunity, and we're going to make it a very open and ecumenical space to do that. It's going to be right here at 7 p.m. on Thursday, December 1st, speaking of pluralism. I hope you can all make it. And then we have an event with Allah Murabbit, who's known as the Doogie Howser of the Middle East. Doogie Howser was the show back in the 80s. But it's about this young medical doctor. She's, mashallah, in her early 20s, and she's a medical doctor, but she's also a human rights advocate, and she's somebody who works for the UN in terms of on public health around the world. And she was also a voice in the Libyan revolution. Very, very awesome individual. And so she'll be coming in December. And so please look out for that conversation as well.
Sign up for the email list, grab a mug.
Please join the email list, and if you don't already have a Muslim Life Program mug, please take a mug so you can remember us as you sip your tea. And please keep us in your prayers, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.